Have you ever known someone a really long time, and even though you've never been best friends, you've kept up with their journey through mutual friends or what I'd call extended family? This month's guest is one of those people for me. He's done some seriously cool work, and when I reached out, he didn't hesitate to say yes. As a result, we all win. I bet you've seen his work before and didn't even know it was his. Quick note, we just crossed 5,000 downloads last month, but overall I think we could still get better traction on the episodes. I welcome any feedback and ideas you have, but I'd also ask you to tell a friend and share the podcast if you like what you're hearing. I have some great episodes coming the rest of the year and I could really use the assist. For now, enjoy the episode with my friend Greg. Joining me today is Greg Anderson. And Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Now, Greg, I always like to start by asking people to introduce themselves so the audience has a sense of who they're listening to. So can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Absolutely. My name is Greg Anderson. I'm an Emmy-nominated visual effects supervisor and executive and a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures and Arts and Sciences, as well as the Television Academy. I've been in the business about 29 years and originally from St. Louis, Missouri.
Now, Greg, where would you say we know each other from? I think this might be an easy one.
Yeah, so we went to MIT together.
You were one of the upperclassmen, and as we were preparing for this, I got a little bit more insight into your story, but you're one of those folks who I just said, he's handling his business, he pledged, he did it all, and he's going to be out of here long before I am, because you were I think you were third year at the time, and I just was like, oh, Greg's handling his business, cool, he's an architecture major, that's dope.
It wasn't that simple, and I think you probably finished before I did.
Well, the truth is, there was a very small community of us on campus, and probably about a third of us lived in the same dorm. And
Right.
so you were plus or minus like right down the hall from me
Yep.
for my first 2 years at MIT, and one of many upperclassmen who sort of looked at us and said, oh, these poor freshmen, they're never going to make it.
I mean, it wasn't that we didn't think you were going to make it. We knew what you were about to go through and how shell shocked you were going to be. MIT didn't make many mistakes when it came to admissions, so we knew you'd do well.
It tends to work out. But listen, you are one of the people whose career has unfolded in ways that we never imagined it would. At least I never imagined it would from the dorm. And it's
Right.
been really awesome to watch your career from a distance and see the accomplishments and the accolades and just the progress and what you represent. And so I am truly grateful that although we haven't seen each other in probably decades at this point,
Yeah.
that you responded to the call and agreed to be on the podcast today. So I'm really looking forward to it and just want to make sure I say thank you up front in case I forget to say it at the end.
Oh, well, I really appreciate you even wanting to hear my story. So you've got a great podcast, so I'm honored to be on it.
Greg, after speaking with you when we were preparing and your home being in visual effects, I have been using special effects and visual effects interchangeably. So before we get into this, can you take 30 seconds and just define the difference for people like me who probably didn't understand it?
Absolutely. So visual effects encompasses both digital effects and practical effects. Typically, when you say special effects, you mean effects that are actually created on set in live action, whether there's a fire or an explosion or smoke. Those would be, those practical effects would be called special effects.
Got it.
And then our work that we do digitally gets added into that, and the umbrella is called visual effects.
So then I will try and keep myself honest the rest of this conversation, but let's start at the beginning. When did you get your first taste of visual effects or even just special effects back in the day? What was your first like, oh crap, that's pretty cool?
So it actually goes back to when I was 6 years old. That was the first time I remember going to a movie theater, and the movie I saw was Star Wars. I was sitting in like the second or third row, and the destroyer flies overhead, and I was sort of blown away by that. I think that really very subtly, very early on influenced my interests in life, let's say. So from there, I became a big Star Wars nerd. I love Empire Strikes Back. As I got into Lego, I had all the Lego, space sets and so forth. And that led to comic books. And I was an avid artist. And so all of these things early on were influencing my future career. I just didn't know it at the time.
Fast forward, you end up at MIT. And when I met you, you were an architecture major. Was that,
Right.
again, a predestined move or a foregone conclusion?
So originally, I wanted to be before I got to MIT. I wanted to be an architecture major. My father owned a construction company, and we both like to draw, and it just seemed sort of natural. But when I got to college, MIT was very expensive. My parents were really having some challenges in terms of like how to sort of afford me going there, and I was turned on to a scholarship program at Belcor in Jersey that would give a sort of a free ride to students of color who were interested in electrical engineering. So I became interested in electrical engineering. And admittedly, I by that time I had sort of taught myself a couple of different computer languages while I was in high school and even junior high. So I was like, yeah, I'll do electrical engineering instead. And as I got into it, I was the engineering student with all the drawings in my notebooks, and I wasn't having fun, and thus I wasn't paying attention.
Right. Which
Uh,
is never a recipe for success at MIT.
no, definitely not, definitely not. After a couple of years of that, freshman and sophomore year of that, basically I was given the choice or they suggested strongly that maybe I should be architecture after all, after some challenges.
Had you
And
taken any classes in architecture?
so I had taken one art class. I can't remember which one it was. I had done really well. I'd done a performance art piece and some really abstract work that
Mm-hmm.
I think garnered some attention. And so the school was like, "Hey, you've got some skill here. Maybe architecture is a better fit for you." I switched to architecture, and as soon as I was in architecture, it was clear that everyone there was still sort of drawing by hand and building models by hand, and I was already into building using computer aided design tools. And so while I was the art guy in electrical engineering, I was the tech guy in architecture. And that was really the sort of a really early moment in undergrad for me. Even though I didn't know about visual effects,
Mm-hmm.
it became clear to me that I straddled these two worlds of art and tech, and that theme would keep coming back around throughout undergrad and into grad school.
And so once you're in that program, you start meeting other people like you, or how does it progress as you get settled in? Because it feels like you probably should have been there all along. MIT kind of took you the long way around and helped you find your way home. But then what's it like there, and who are you meeting there?
You may or may not know this, but the School of Architecture at MIT is the oldest school of architecture in the country.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and the first black graduate of MIT was an architecture major,
Wow.
Robert Taylor.
Robert Taylor, yep.
So, little trivia. The students there had a variety of different backgrounds. While they were focused in these sort of in architecture, there were a lot of different sort of interests.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some who were very sort of art focused, others were very focused on building technology, and then there were the design students. And so I was in the design track. I was trying to use computer aided design tools wherever I could within my projects. And that attracted the attention of the dean of the graduate school, Ike Colbert,
Mm-hmm.
who then introduced me to now my longtime friend and mentor, Dr. Larry Sass, who's a professor at MIT now in the architecture department. At the time, he was a graduate student.
And,
And so,
and and our house tutor, I might
and
add.
our house
And
tutor,
our
that's
house
right.
tutor, our graduate resident tutor.
We started working together on a project called the Middle Passage Project. It was early days. We were creating what would be a pitch to build a monument to the Middle Passage that would sit on the Channel Islands off the coast of Boston. There were several prominent people involved. Don Stull, who's a very prominent black architect of a firm called Stull and Lee. This monument would have paintings which were being posed by very famous artist Paul Goodnight. We were charged with envisioning what this monument would look like, and with the hopes of using that to kind of help push the project forward. We were doing very elaborate animation with camera moves and water, and really visualizing this very abstract monument. We ended up getting a lot of acclaim and winning some awards for our work.
What's crazy, and I don't think most people would realize this, is we're talking about like the mid 90s.
Yeah, this was
This
like
was,
1994.
yeah, because people like CAD drawings, I do those on my phone all the time, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
not back then you didn't. If people are
that,
curious
that's right.
where we're going with this, pull out a movie from the early '90s and check out the visual effects in that.
Right.
Now, Greg, you start by seeing Star Wars and getting captivated with that whole universe and the toys and the Legos and the building, and you end up at MIT. Maybe take the long way around to getting to architecture, and you start doing some really interesting things. Shout out to Ike Colbert, who helped a lot of us while he was there and we were there. And it's
Right.
always good to hear Larry's name come up in conversation. But when did you know that this was going to be home for you in visual effects? When did you know you wouldn't be designing houses,
Right.
or something like that?
It was in I stayed at MIT for graduate school, and it was during the first year. I started seeing other fellow students who were graduating from MIT from the architecture program and going on to prestigious architecture firms, and the universal message was the pay is really bad. And while it's understandable that just fresh graduates out of school weren't going to be making a lot of money, I had by this time a lot of student loans,
Right,
and
right.
I was not hearing things that really encouraged me to do it. I also realized that while I enjoyed design and I enjoyed design thinking, it wasn't what like really woke me up in the morning.
Right, right.
At that point, I was really into computer graphics and CAD and finding new ways to kind of apply them to architecture. So I was much more interested in that than I was in being a designer.
Did you try working at an architecture firm and really seeing what the job was like for yourself?
I did. I worked one summer at a firm in St. Louis. While I didn't expect to do anything particularly interesting, I was doing some CAD drawings or whatever. But what what really resonated for me was seeing the older architects who'd been there for 10 or 15 years, and they didn't look happy at all. And I was like, this my fate? This is my future? I don't know. Maybe I was just a kid, but I was like, there's got to be a better way,
Yeah,
at least.
on the one hand, you see the excited graduates with no money, and you see the older guys with money who aren't happy and not excited, and you're like, wow, this we're just flip flopping the two by two, and neither one of those is the right box.
Right, right.
So how did you break free of that? I mean, alongside all of this happening, you and Larry are winning awards for the work you're doing, but then how does it end up on the path you're on now?
Sure. A friend of Larry's, she saw my work and she said she knew someone that she felt I should talk to who was working in visual effects in Hollywood. And his name was Keith Hunter. He was working at a company called Rhythm and Hughes, which at the time I think was working on the movie Babe, and they'd won an Oscar for visual effects for that. So Keith was African American, had studied architecture at Ohio State, and then gone on to the Harvard Graduate School of Design as
Mm-hmm.
well, and sort of had a similar path as me. He was really into computer graphics and CAD. She put me in touch with him, and he ended up becoming my sort of long distance mentor
Mm-hmm.
my last year of graduate school.
How did he tell you to plug into the industry? Because I assume you're either working on that project with him or he's coaching you on how to get a foothold. Because you're coming from probably a non-traditional background, like a black
Right.
kid from St. Louis at MIT with an architecture degree, talking about let me talk to you about this visual effects thing that you're working on and how I
Right.
can help.
So he really recommended that I diversify my work. So my portfolio had a lot of architectural work, and he encouraged me to use my design skills to create other worlds, robots, vehicles, jets, tanks, add some other ideas to that, so that a potential employer can see like the breadth of your work and see how you think about design and visual effects. And so I spent the year, I taught myself another piece of software that we had in our computer lab in the School of Architecture. And I spent the year designing. I did a robot, I did a tank, I did a alien landscape. All the while I was also still doing my studies, and I was doing a lot of really high end rendering
Mm-hmm.
for other like school related projects as well. And then the way in which we worked, It was very early, not exactly pre-internet, but it's like 1995. So in order to share work, I created a website. I taught myself HTML, scripted a very basic website where I could post images for him to look at, and then he would give me notes, and then I would go back and address the notes, which I didn't realize at the time, but he was teaching me how they work in visual effects
Yeah,
because it's a very iterative process.
except that they're usually like in the same room looking at the same piece of paper, and here you are doing it across the country, which is, we're recording this on Zoom right now,
Right.
but this wasn't a thing 30 years ago.
Right. We were kind of preceding how we would all work during COVID.
Right, exactly. So you put your mixtape together, so to
Yeah.
speak. You load up the copies in the trunk. What do you do with it? Who do you like? What do you do with a mixtape
Yeah.
of robots
So
and alien landscapes?
I put all my work onto a VHS tape, and we had in one of our sort of post production areas, I was able to put music to it. I think my background track was James Brown, The Big Payback for some reason. I was listening to a lot of James Brown at the time, and so I took seven VHS copies to a conference for an organization called SIGGRAPH, which is a global computer graphics organization, and they would have an annual conference that would attract like 100,000 people from around the world who were all interested in all manner of computer graphics. At the time, it was also a great recruiting opportunity, and
Right,
so
right.
all the major like film studios and visual effects studios would be there. I brought my seven sort of demo reels, walking around the conference floor, and they basically just say like, "Hey, we got a giant cardboard box. If you want them to review your work, put your reel in the box." And so by the end of the day, Monday, I'd given out six of my seven reels, and I was there until Friday. With only one reel left, I was like, I can't. I didn't want to give that last reel away. All of the companies, when they were interested in speaking with someone, they would have a hospitality suite at the nearby hotels. And so I went to all of the hospitality suites, and I'm 25 years old at the time. And they're like, "Hey, just drop your reel off." And I was like, "Yeah, this is my last one. Can I wait to talk to someone?" And they were like, "Okay." And so so I'm waiting. I waited 2 or 3 hours at some companies just to sit down and talk with someone. And I ended up getting several interviews from several companies. And I ended up getting, out of the seven interviews, I got five offers that week.
Wow,
And
wow.
the one that stuck was my first job, which was Sony Pictures ImageWorks.
And was that instant? Like, did they just look at the reel and like pull
They
one of
were
those like Don Kings and say, "Come with us, you're hired"?
it was interesting. They saw my reel, and the reel is the reel of a kid getting into visual effects. But more importantly, they saw my architecture work, which was very, very realistic
Right.
and very refined. They just had not seen that kind of work for someone coming out of school at the time. And so my future boss looked at the work, and then he like ran out of the room to go get the visual effects supervisor for the movie and said, "Hey, you got to meet this kid from MIT." And the rest is really history. What I took away from that moment, or from that whole week, was I learned that I had an ability to connect with people
Right.
that I don't think I really fully understood. It was that connection that I think, and my ability to communicate and talk about my ideas and my point of view, that I think was really the kicker.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as much. I mean, some of the work was really good. Some of it was very young, but it was really my ability to talk about the work
Right. Right.
that I think was different.
So I have two questions before we wrap up this part of the conversation. I imagine that as you're doing this and you're asking people to watch your reel, you're trying to finish up your degree at MIT, but what exactly is the degree that you get for what it is that you're doing in the mid 90s?
Yeah, my my master's degree is a bit unique. So it's a Master of Science unspecified. And the reason why it was unspecified was, at the time, after the first semester of my first year of graduate school, I had run run out of courses to take because I was really focused on this visualization within architecture, and there just at the time weren't that many courses. And
Right.
so my graduate advisor, who was also the dean of the School of Architecture, Bill Mitchell, he helped devise a curriculum that spanned the School of Architecture, the Media Lab, and the School of Computer Science. And
Right.
so I was taking design studios, I was taking film classes, and I was still like coding C++ and writing renderers at the same time.
I
And
I
so,
work in recruiting now, Greg, and I can't think of a more attractive resume than the Master of Science unspecified degree.
right, exactly.
My second question for you is, what was the movie that Sony hired you to work on?
So my first movie was Starship Troopers. I was very fortunate. I worked on that show for about 18 months, and we were nominated for an Oscar for visual effects. I worked with the visual effects supervisor of the show is a Oscar-winning visual effects supervisor by the name of Scott Anderson. So
Wow, right out the box.
yeah, that was my first movie.
Greg, there's a lot of things we could talk about here about what's special about the work you're doing in visual effects, but where should we start here? How do you think about what's special about what it is that you're doing?
One of the things that really attracted me to visual effects is that it very much requires a sort of right brain and left brain approach to the work. It's both analytical and artistic. And what I learned as a new sort of person in the industry was at the time, there were no degrees in visual effects. And
Right.
so there were many people, though, that came from architecture who maybe just didn't want to do architecture anymore. And so they found their way to visual effects. And it's very similar in that, architecture is also both very analytical and very artistic at the same time, like how to
Right.
make a building stand up, how to make it look beautiful.
Right.
And so visual effects is similar in that ultimately we're creating images, but we're creating images that are created with very technical processes
Right.
that are maybe not as sort of fundamental as drawing or sculpting. So you're using computers and you're telling computers how to create an image, which through programming and scripting and other tools. And so it kind of scratches that same itch that architecture did for me.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember in the early 90s I ended up doing an internship also in the Bell system at AT&T, and one of my summers was with Pixel machines, and they
Mm-hmm.
were like a high-end graphics computer that, it was the size of like a regular refrigerator now,
Yep.
and it was trying to render a few seconds of video like what you saw in Terminator 2, the liquid
Right.
metal with the reflections, and it was like super high end, and there wasn't really anybody doing that, and it wasn't clear like who would do that. Like, what's the background? Is it hardware? Is it software? Is it an artist? Is it? And the answer is probably yes, all of them. And
Yes,
architecture is actually a
for sure.
deceptively obvious blend of the two.
Right.
What was your art background though? Like you mentioned Star Wars, but that's like reading comics. Like, were you an
Yes.
artist?
Yeah. So I grew up drawing. My dad's a great artist. When I told him when I was 5 or 6, I wanted to be an animator. And he was like, okay. By then, they saw that I was special and could probably do anything. And my dad always wanted a doctor in the family. He's like, well, you can always draw, but you should go be a doctor or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, that was literally all I loved drawing. So growing up, it was really art and math were my jam.
And you stumbled into a field that literally is using both every
Yeah,
day.
yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. The other thing that always stands out to me about visual effects is the worlds that people imagine. Is that also a part of it for you? Because it's one thing to
100%.
describe and write a story and have people immerse themselves in a book, but it's almost like I can step into your brain in some ways.
Absolutely. A visual effects supervisor's job really is to work with the director, work with the showrunner, work with the writer to help bring the ideas on the page or the ideas in their head to life. And
Right.
so we're often asked to create something that hasn't been created before or create the impossible. My job is really to kind of help bring that out and not just directly from their own sort of voice, but to bring my point of view to it as well. And I think that's why people like working with me, because I have a point of view and I see myself as an artist and as a filmmaker. And so the process is iterative, it's additive, and that sort of mix of creative collaboration is what ends up on the screen.
I understand that you can help people bring their imagination to the screen. When we were preparing for this, you also talked about how, in your own imagination as a kid, whether it was Legos or science fiction or drawing, sort of you had a lot going on in your head. What was an early project maybe that you worked on where you really had to bring this to life?
There were several projects along the way that I think I sort of contributed to, but as a visual effects supervisor, there are two projects that really stand out for me where I could really felt like I could bring some of myself to it. It was Luke Cage, and as well as the limited series When They See Us, that was directed by Ava DuVernay.
Before we get into When They See Us, can you just give me the 30-second version of what that was about for people who may not have seen it yet?
Sure. When They See Us is a limited series about the Central Park Five. There were five teenagers in New York City in 1989 who were wrongly convicted of a crime and sent to jail, ultimately exonerated.
Mm-hmm.
But the way in which it happened was they were all teenagers. They were denied their rights. They didn't have parents present, and they were really treated very poorly. And it really affected the rest of their lives. And so
Mm-hmm.
Ava DuVernay brought this to life, wrote and directed this series, and it was my first opportunity to collaborate with her.
So I remember the Central Park Five, or as we call them now, the Exonerated Five.
Right.
How does visual effects and imagination come into that? Because that seems like a live action, like it's people, it's a camera, it's not science fiction or fantasy.
For sure. Because this all took place, it's a period piece. So it all takes place in 1989,
Right.
New York City. And New York City at the time when we shot it, which I believe was 2018, looked very different. There's bike lanes, there's modern buildings everywhere. The city's a lot cleaner
Right.
than it used to
You got
be,
EVs running around.
and electrical vehicles. And so a lot of our work was around we were out in the city shooting different blocks. We had to then make it look like 1989 New York, which could take, we would change all the cars. We would add, the hot dog vendors. We added like people breakdancing. There was a lot of different layers of texture that helped it feel authentic. And these are what we call invisible effects. And so as a
Mm-hmm.
viewer, you should just, when it comes on screen, you should just believe that it is 1989 New York City so that you're never taken out of the story.
So that's easier to do, I imagine, than like closing down the street and bringing in a bunch of cars from the mid 80s or anything like that. You just do that all digitally now?
Well, so the thing is, we did actually bring in cars from the 80s. The challenge is that New York is a very big city. And so productions are always sort of confined by time and resources. And so there's never enough of those kinds of things. And so what we would often do is intermix real cars with digital cars, for instance. If we do our job well, you just see them together and you don't know which one is which. You just know that you're in 1989.
It sounds like there's a lot of passive visual effects that you don't notice. But was there, when you do a project like that, is there something about it where you're like, okay, but we've got to nail this part of it?
Absolutely. With this project, there was the pivotal sort of end scene that Ava envisioned, where one of the lead characters returns back to a restaurant where he was before all of this happened, and it was meant to be this very intimate moment where the camera is really close on him as he enters his store, and then it pulls out, and we see Central Park. Well, about 2 days before we were supposed to shoot the scene, art department was working on the building, and it's an older building in Harlem, and some bricks started falling off the building, and it was a safety hazard, and so New York City came in and put scaffolding all the way around the building, 5 stories of scaffolding,
It's going to mess
and
up your shot.
it completely messed up the shot. We'd already seen this building before. It didn't have scaffolding on it. And so immediately we knew, and we couldn't find another location in time. We knew it was going to be a big visual effects shot that we just had to come up with on the fly. And so we shoot the scene, and Ava added 3 dozen pedestrians, some of which I didn't know about, maybe most of which I didn't know about beforehand, that were crossing the scene as the camera's pulling out. And it all was choreographed and sort of beautiful, so from a sort of directing standpoint. But from a visual effects standpoint, it was a massive, massive challenge because now none of the background worked at all. So the entire background had to get recreated. The extras were walking in and out of the scaffolding, so all the extras would have to be recreated in visual effects. As the camera's pulling back and we're shooting, we'd gotten through a couple of takes. This was August at the time in New York, so it was very hot, humid. Winds start to blow, and the Video Village tent starts rolling down Fifth Avenue, and and then we see a couple of lightning strikes, and we're on a 50-foot techno crane, so it's a huge crane. It's like up in the air, and around take 5 or 6, the producer's like, "We're done. Like it's not safe. We have to stop shooting." And I will never forget. Ava and I had been working together for about 5 days, so we didn't know each other well. And she just turned and looked at me and said, "Brother, I hope you got it," and just walks off. And it was like, it ended up being like the most expensive shot in the film. And it took us about, I would say, about 6 months to complete the work.
Wow.
When we were delivering the film, I flew out to LA to present it to her. And I think she was sitting about 3 feet from the screen watching this shot replay over and over and over again. No blinking, no, just staring intently. And I'm there literally like sweat running down
Right.
myself and my producer. And she turns to me and she goes, "Brother, I don't know what you did, but this is flawless." And I was like, I slumped in my chair. I was like, "Oh God,"
Holy cow.
and from that point on, I went on to work on 4 other projects with her. And whenever she had a project, she would call me, and it was really great honor to kind of collaborate with her so many times.
It's wild because we're talking about it being special to bring other people's imagination to the screen. But on a more traditional sort of visual effect level, you did tell me about your work on one of my favorite movies, X-Men 2, of all things.
Yep,
And it sounded like that was something that you imagined. Like this was your imagination. Can you share
for
a little bit
sure.
about what that was? Because when you were telling me, I was just like awestruck because I vividly remember the scene that you were telling me about.
Absolutely. So on X-Men 2, I was a CG supervisor, which is like a supervisor level down from visual effects supervisor. So I've been in the business for a while, and I was interviewing for the job, and I'm a huge X-Men fan. I've always been an X-Men fan since I was
Same,
like 10 years old.
same.
So they had 2 sequences that they were looking for supervisors for. One was Nightcrawler and one was a Phoenix sequence. And I just proceeded to nerd all the way out about what the Nightcrawler effect should look like and why and what was actually happening. And the 2 visual effects supervisors of the film, Mike Fink and Stephen Rosenbaum, were like, they were just kind of like staring at me while I'm like totally nerding out about this. And so they're like, "Okay, we get it. All right, great. We can start." And they had done some preliminary work that which they felt like wasn't quite working. So I kind of scrapped all of that, built a new team, and designed the Nightcrawler effect that you see in X-Men 2 with my team and integrated that into the whole sequence.
If people listening want to check this out, I highly recommend. Just the opening sequence in X-Men 2 is one of the craziest action scenes in that whole franchise.
It was a brilliantly shot and choreographed scene that we were able to then augment with some very, very cool visual effects.
Greg, what else makes visual effects special to you because of the work that you're doing?
What makes it special to me is working in this business. We are creating art that affects culture, and so it lives on beyond you and just your reach. And you never really know like how your work is gonna affect someone who's seen it.
Right.
And I've had the pleasure of working on a lot of really interesting shows that I think where people have come up to me and like thanked me for my work, which was pretty gratifying.
I've seen a bunch of them because you did a lot of the Netflix Marvel sort of collabs,
Yeah,
right? Like Punisher and the
I
other.
did. Yep, Luke Cage, Punisher, the second season of Iron Fist. You know, I supervised the visual effects for all of those shows.
And
Uh,
what is the effect that it has on people? I mean, Punisher might make people scared of going to certain cities, but what
right.
what about the other ones?
Well, I mean, I think Luke Cage was special.
Hmm.
I think that we don't often see black superheroes, particularly at that time. That you know, this was before Black Panther came out, and so this notion of a bulletproof black man who was a superhero in Harlem,
In a hoodie.
yeah, in a hoodie, it really resonated with the black community. I remember going home to St. Louis after it came out, and I think one friend had introduced me. He's like, "Yeah, this guy did the visual effects for Luke Cage," and it was like I was a celebrity. Like people wanted to talk about the show, they wanted to talk about the effects. They were so proud to see themselves, to see black people represented in such a sort of complete way. There were heroes, there were villains, there were people whose motives weren't clear. You know, black showrunner, black directors, black writers. Like it was just a very unique show to be a part of helping making a superhero super. I took a lot of pride in that.
I remember when it came out because we had seen the teasers and it was like an event.
It
You know,
was
kind of
definitely
kind of like Black Panther, like put it in the calendar 3 months from now because when this happens, we're not doing anything that night. We're watching
yeah.
it.
And you know, this was when Netflix, the content that they were creating at the time wasn't of the volume that we have now, and so it was an event. It came out on Friday night, and I remember Netflix not being able to access Netflix because
Right.
so many people were trying to watch Luke Cage. So you know, it's like we broke the internet in a way, you know, and which was very very cool.
Yeah, I remember when it came out, and I remember I think there was either one season or both seasons, like the opening track for all of them were different Wu Tang tracks. Like, I mean, it was like the blackest thing I had seen on Netflix, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
It was the blackest show I've ever worked on. I on that show I met Rakim, Tribe Called Quest, like Ali Shaheed Muhammad DJ the rap party.
Come on,
KRS-One performed at the season 2 rap party.
come
Do you know
on,
what
man.
I mean? Like it was very, very black AF.
Greg, as I mentioned at the top, you're one of the people that I've admired from a distance, watching your career unfold and seeing the accolades and the awards and the Emmys and the Oscars and all these things. But I know that deep down, like your presence in the industry also matters. And not everybody needs to take one for the team, but you're doing things that you really enjoy doing. But let's talk a little bit about your presence in the industry because it is special to have you there. It is special to have you in certain rooms and things like that. Why don't we talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure. Representation in visual effects for African American and Black people is still very, very low. When I got into the industry, I think at Sony, there were maybe 5 of us out of a company of 1,000 people. And even now, the number of Black visual effects supervisors and animation directors around the world is less than 20. Yet while there are more artists, Black artists in the field, the ones who've reached these sort of highest levels where they're decision makers and department heads is still like painfully small.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel very strongly that part of my reason for being is to really shed light on that and try to create opportunities and try to sort of be as vocal as I can about visual effects and this industry being a viable option for folks who are interested in art and technology because that's the only way that we're going to get more representation in the industry. But it's tricky, you know. It's a very difficult field. There's lots of long hours, and now the industry has changed a lot in that a lot of the workforce is outside of the United States, places like Canada and the UK and throughout Asia, India, Korea, China. So it makes it even more difficult for that representation to happen, at least for African Americans.
Right. And I know in advertising and other creative spaces, we sometimes see companies do like ridiculous things because they don't have diversity in the room. And I remember watching a couple things and you just be like, well, they definitely didn't have any women in that meeting before they approved that idea. I'm
Right?
not sure it's the same in visual effects, but are there examples where like your presence really like made a difference and sort of got things where they needed to be?
Interestingly, there was a moment on When They See Us where during the show, there were characters who, of course, had period correct hair. There were a lot of high top fades and so forth. And so these were accomplished through various applications and stuff like that on set. When we got into post, to be honest, like the fades weren't tight. And so, having had a high top fade during that time, my own crew who was working on these shots, I brought in pictures of me from like late 80s and early 90s so they could see, what a fade looked like because most of my crew was either Asian or white. And so they didn't know. I taught everyone how to create a digital fade on that show.
Greg, I might have to check my photo albums, but I might have a photo of both of us with hair and flat
Oh
high
yeah.
top fades from back in the
Oh yeah.
day. I want to thank you for joining today. You have a lot going on professionally and personally, and carving out the time to do this on back-to-back days I know was not easy, especially with a cross-country move. If people want to see your work or follow your journey, where should they go? You mentioned a couple of shows that you worked on. Can you just rehash those and give people a sense of where they can see what we just talked about?
Sure. I mean, I've been fortunate to work on a lot of really big films, a lot of projects for Netflix. So like When They See Us is on Netflix. A lot of the Marvel projects you can find on the Disney app, Luke Cage and others, X-Men 2 and so forth. My work, I'm on all the sort of social media and LinkedIn and so forth. IMDb, which is the Internet Movie Database, where all of our credits and stuff are listed.
Awesome. I will include all those in the show notes. And again, Greg, thanks for taking time out to join us today and talk about why being at home in visual effects is special.
Well, thanks for having me, man. This is very, very cool. I love being able to talk about this stuff.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes automatically. You can go to myhomeisspecial.com to see the full project and sign up for email updates. Be sure to follow KBevPhoto on Instagram or go to kbevphoto.com to see what I'm snapping these days. There's a lot on both to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.